welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories, or I will come for you. Before today's story, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who listens in to my channel and posts so many positive comments. The last few months have been particularly difficult due to unforeseen family events. I appreciate each and every one of you fueling me with such positive energy. I fucking love you guys. If anyone would like early access to my latest stories and an ad-free listening experience, consider becoming one of the Curator's disciples. The link is in the description below. Without further ado, today's story, The Feeding Ledger, by the Curator. If this gets deleted or I disappear, check the Wayback Machine, copy it, mirror it. Just don't let them erase me like they did the others. I know how this sounds, but if you've ever spent enough time on the Tor network, you'll know that sometimes you find things that look fake until they start bleeding into your real life. I moved to a place called Havens Hollow about 3 years ago. Population 12. Technically, it's still part of Alaska, but it barely feels connected to the rest of the world. You need either a snowmobile or a float plane to reach it for most of the year. There's no cell service, no traffic lights, not even a post office. Most of the people here are off-grid survivalists or old-timers who came out to die alone. Then there's me, just a guy who was trying to disappear. I used to write for a digital rag that focused on fringe science and paranormal conspiracies. Clickbait trash, but I liked it. I had a series going about something I called the 7 Silent Craters, supposedly ancient impact sites in Siberia that never appeared on seismic records. I claimed they were ritualistic, sacrificial in purpose. My editor said it read like high-functioning schizophrenia in paragraph form. I got fired. A few months later, he went missing during a trip to northern Canada. No one ever found the body. After that, I gave up on the career. Gave up on everything, honestly. Moved as far from civilization as I could. Found a cabin outside Havens Hollow, and figured I'd drink myself into early retirement. It was peaceful for a while. Cold, lonely, but peaceful. The kind of lonely that makes you start talking to yourself in the mirror just to hear a voice. You start picking up on the weirdness too, like how the birds never fly too close to the old mining shaft near the edge of town, or how the townsfolk start acting strange whenever the end of the year rolls around. Like they're counting something, like they're waiting for something. I chalked it up to small-town eccentricity, paranoia, cabin fever. I wasn't even that bothered when I heard strange clicking sounds outside my window at night. I figured raccoons or moose or some drunk neighbor wandering home in the dark. Then, last week, I found something that made everything change. I was going through an old Tor bookmark folder I hadn't touched since my deep dive days. Most of the links were dead, but one still worked. It was a site I didn't remember ever visiting. The URL was simple, thefeedingledger.onion. No title. Just a black screen with blood-red serif font and 2 things in the center of the page. The first was a counter that read, "Sacrifices this year, 11 of 12. The second was a long list of names, dates, and grainy video links. The videos looked like something out of a ritualistic horror film. Hooded figures tossing screaming victims into what appeared to be a massive pit in the earth. But it wasn't just a hole. It moved. The pit had layers that flexed and rippled. It pulsed like it was breathing. The rim was lined with jagged ridges that looked too much like teeth to ignore. I assumed it was fake, deep fakes, some kind of art project or ARG, until the counter ticked in real time while I was watching. A message appeared at the top of the screen. One more, or it wakes. The next morning, I took my pickup into town to stock up on gas and canned food. As I passed the old wooden population sign nailed to a bent metal post at the edge of the forest, I slowed down. It had changed. It used to read, "Welcome to Havens Hollow, population 12. Now, it read, population 11. The paint was still wet. At first, I thought maybe some dumb kid did it. We don't have many kids here, but a couple of the older folks have teenage grandsons who come in the summer. But when I got to Maggie's general store, she was crying behind the counter. Her hands were trembling as she tried to count change for an old guy buying batteries. I asked her what was wrong. "Rita's gone," she whispered. "Just gone. Vanished last night. House unlocked, lights still on. Her cat was sitting on the porch, meowing like crazy. She wouldn't just leave like that. She hated the woods." I tried to calm her down, told her maybe Rita had an emergency, but my stomach twisted as soon as she said the name. I drove back home and opened the site again. There it was. Entry number 11. Rita, April 6, 2025. Video. I clicked the video. It was shot in the woods at night, probably on an old night vision camcorder. Several hooded figures stood in a circle, chanting in some guttural liquid language. Two of them were dragging a woman by her arms. She was struggling, screaming. They had a burlap sack over her head, but I knew it was her. She was wearing that oversized tan cardigan she always wore, and her pink Crocs. They dragged her to the edge of the pit. It wasn't a hole. It was a mouth, a pulsing, muscular orifice in the earth. I could see the teeth now. Layers of them, wet and glistening. They moved with slow, hungry anticipation. The chanting grew louder, more frantic. Then they tossed her in. She didn't fall. She was pulled. Mid-air, her body jerked violently, like her bones snapped inwards. As she hit the rim, the mouth lunged up and clamped shut, severing her at the waist. Her upper body disappeared down into the darkness, while her legs thrashed above for a few seconds before being yanked down by some invisible force. The screen shook. The ground beneath the camera rippled, almost like it was breathing. Then the video ended. I staggered back from my computer and vomited on the floor. When I looked back at the screen, the counter hadn't changed. Still 11 of 12. One more, or it wakes. That night, I didn't sleep. My trail cam, the one I set up in the woods behind my cabin, sent an alert to my phone at 3:12 a.m. I opened the feed. Shapes moved between the trees. Not animals. Not deer or moose. Tall shapes. Human-shaped. But they didn't walk. They glided. Their robes didn't sway. They didn't make noise. They moved like they belonged to the forest, like they were part of it. I checked the site again. There was a new folder now. It was labeled Nodes/Havens Hollow. I clicked on it. It opened a table with 12 names. One was grayed out. Next to each name was a note, last known activity. Each had a time stamp. One of them was mine. Derek K. Active. Last seen 4:31 a.m. The others were blinking. Some said pending. If this site is real, if it's tracking us, then someone here is feeding the pit. And it needs one more. I didn't leave the house the next day. I kept my rifle loaded, and leaned against the table, checking every sound outside like it was a threat. The wind had changed. It no longer howled through the trees. It moaned, like something in pain was dragging its breath across the sky. By mid-afternoon, I'd worked up the nerve to drive back into town. Maggie's store was closed. So was the bait shop and the little community shed we used as a gathering hall. No one was outside, not even the dogs that usually wandered freely around the gravel roads. I drove past the church and parked in front of Rita's cabin. The door was still open. The place had a suffocating stillness to it, the kind of silence that presses into your eardrums and makes your heartbeat sound too loud. I stepped inside slowly, rifle raised, calling out her name even though I already knew there would be no answer. The living room was untouched. A single mug of coffee sat cold on the side table. Her slippers were right by the recliner, a crocheted blanket folded neatly over the back of the couch. The only thing that looked out of place was the cat. It lay dead in the middle of the kitchen floor, curled around its own tail like it had just stopped breathing. Its eyes were wide open, but they weren't cloudy. They were bone white, like all the color had been drained from them. I stepped around it and walked deeper into the house. That was when I noticed the smell. It wasn't rot. It wasn't even death. It was something much worse. The air was thick and syrupy, like burnt plastic soaked in urine and blood. Every breath coated the inside of my throat with a taste that made me gag. I followed it to the bedroom. Her sheets were gone. The mattress was bare and soaked through with something thick and reddish brown. On the wall above the bed, etched into the drywall in what I pray wasn't blood, were symbols. Circles inside circles. Jagged, tooth-like ridges. A massive eye scrawled across the center, with sharp lines radiating outward like cracked glass. Something had been dragged across the floor. The grooves were deep, clawing scratches in the wood that led to her walk-in closet. I opened it. That was when I saw the first piece of her. It was an arm. Just an arm. No shoulder, no bone exposed. Just smooth, sealed flesh at the socket, as if the rest of her had never existed. The skin was pale, but not normal pale. It had a faint bluish sheen to it, almost like the surface of a fish. Her fingers were twitching. I swear to God, they were still twitching. I backed away fast, nearly tripping over a pile of books and an old Polaroid camera lying on the floor. The books were journals, handwritten. Her handwriting. I grabbed the one on top and opened it. April 1st. They come to the pit at night. I saw them from the window. They wear the skins of men, but their shadows move wrong. They don't walk. They slither when they think no one's watching. April 2nd, the ledger updated. I watched it happen. They don't know I see it. But I see all of them. Every name. Every time stamp. I think Maggie's involved. April 3rd, I can hear it now. Under the floor. It breathes when I sleep. April 4th, they told me I was chosen. I laughed at them. I shouldn't have laughed. April 5th, it opened its eye in my dreams. I woke up with blood on my face and teeth in my pocket. They weren't mine. April 6th, he's coming. I don't want to be awake when it happens. The journal ended there. I stared at the last line for a long time, then reached for the Polaroid camera. There were 3 photos inside. The first was of the pit, taken during the day. It looked like a cave in the earth, dark and still. But even in the photo, I could see a faint, wet shine along the rim. The second photo showed several figures gathered around a bonfire. Their faces were blurred or hidden by hoods. but one of them wore Maggie's red scarf. The third photo was the one that broke me. It was me, standing outside my cabin, looking up at the sky, taken from the tree line, maybe 100 feet away. I dropped the photo and heard something shift behind me. I turned. Rita's cat was gone. Trail of thick, wet paw prints led down the hallway and disappeared into the living room. I followed slowly, rifle shaking in my grip. When I stepped into the main room, I saw the fireplace had been lit. It had been cold and empty when I arrived, but now the flames were roaring, tall and white, flickering in unnatural patterns. The heat hit me like a slap. Something inside the flames moved. A shape, elongated and bone-thin. Claw-like hands reached out and scraped against the brick with an awful squealing noise. Then it was gone. The fire collapsed inward, as if sucked into itself, and vanished entirely. The room went black. I fired once out of panic, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The muzzle flash lit up the room just long enough for me to see something horrible. The eye on the ceiling, open, watching. Veins spread outward from it, like the roots of a tree. They pulsed, dripping something thick and red onto the floor. Then it blinked and disappeared. I ran. I don't remember the drive back. I barely remember getting home. But when I did, I locked every door and nailed every window shut. The trail cam feed was offline. The LED just blinked red, like it had been cut. I opened the site again. The counter still read 11 of 12, but the Haven's hollow node now had something new under my name. Derek K. Active. Last seen, 4:31. Marked. I refreshed the page 5 times. It didn't change. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, rifle in hand, and waited. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the floor beneath me breathed. I swear to you, the wood inhaled. It rose beneath my feet and then dropped, like I was standing on a giant lung. From beneath the floorboards came a wet, hungry growl. Not an animal. Not a bear. Not anything from this earth. It sounded like the earth itself was starving. The next morning, I found myself driving with no plan and no clear destination. I didn't remember deciding to leave the cabin. I just remember opening my eyes and seeing trees rush past on both sides of the road, the rifle laid across the passenger seat, and the Polaroid of me on the dashboard, its glossy surface smeared from where I must have grabbed it with dirty fingers. The sky looked off, like the light was bleeding and wrong from the horizon. There was no sun, just a gray orb hanging behind thin clouds like an infected eye. I stopped in front of the church. The bell tower was empty, but I could have sworn I heard it ringing. Inside, the pews had been moved, cleared out entirely, and in their place stood a crude circle made of dried animal bones. At the center of it all, something had been painted on the floor in thick, caked blood. Not brushed or smeared, but layered, slathered on like someone was trying to build texture. A raised emblem, all jagged triangles and spirals, like a maw vomiting teeth outward in every direction. I turned to leave and froze as I caught the sound of breathing, slow, rhythmic, coming from the altar. I raised my rifle and stepped closer. What I saw, I will never forget. It was Maggie, but she wasn't right. She was naked, kneeling in front of the altar, her skin mottled with bruises and dried blood. Her hair was gone, shaved down to stubble. Her face looked raw, like she'd clawed at it herself, but it was her mouth that chilled me the most. It had been sewn shut, the black thread looped tight through her lips in crude, jagged stitches. Her eyes were open, wide and alert, locked onto mine with the kind of glassy terror that didn't blink. She shook her head violently, as if trying to warn me, and then I heard them. Boots on wood, footsteps coming from the stairwell behind the altar. I aimed the rifle and backed up. 3 figures emerged, all wearing heavy wool cloaks soaked through with something dark and wet. Their hoods hid most of their faces, but I recognized Jim by his limp and the way his fingers tapped rhythmically against his thigh. The man had a nervous tic, always had since Vietnam. Another was Eileen Mathers, our school teacher. I knew it by her build and the glint of her broken glasses, barely hanging from the neckline of her robe. The third, I didn't know. He was tall and gaunt, with skin the color of old wax and a long, slit-like mouth that never seemed to close. It stretched wider and wider as he stepped forward, a tongue like a leech wriggling from between his teeth to taste the air. "You were supposed to leave," Jim said, his voice cracked and uneven. "It's not your year, Derek." I aimed the rifle square at his chest. "What the fuck did you do to her?" she offered herself. "Like Rita, like all of us eventually do. She's the voice now. The mouthpiece." "What mouth?" The tall stranger turned his head sideways, then tilted it all the way back until it cracked, vertebrae snapping like dry sticks. His throat bulged. Something moved beneath his flesh, crawling toward his mouth. He reached up and clawed his lips open wider with both hands. His jaw unhinged with a wet crunch. And then I saw it. The pit. Inside him. A perfect replica of the one in Siberia, but smaller, like a growth, a tumor, a pocket of the abyss seeded into his flesh. It pulsed and writhed, a slick tunnel of concentric teeth and twitching meat. It made no sound, but the pressure in the air changed. My ears popped. Blood streamed from Maggie's nose as she began convulsing violently, her head slamming into the altar again and again. Eileen stepped forward. "We feed it so the world doesn't burn. 12 each year. 1 each month. The last is always the hardest." Jim pulled a hunting knife from his belt and walked toward Maggie. I fired. The shot hit him square in the neck. His body jerked back and hit the floor with a hard slap, blood spraying in an arc that painted the altar and soaked the hem of Eileen's robe. She screamed, but it wasn't fear. It was rage. A raw, animal wail that echoed unnaturally, warping as it bounced off the walls. The tall man didn't flinch. He simply smiled wider, jaw trembling. Then he pointed at me. Eileen lunged. I fired again, hitting her in the stomach, but she didn't stop. She tackled me, her hands clawing at my eyes, nails digging into my face as I fell back into the circle of bones. We rolled across the floor, knocking over a crude totem made of fused deer skulls and human vertebrae. I jammed the rifle upward and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. She howled and bit into my shoulder. I felt her teeth tear through the jacket, through skin, into the muscle, and I screamed. I grabbed a shard of bone from the circle and drove it up under her chin, punching through flesh and into her mouth. Her body seized, eyes bulging, and then she slumped over me, twitching. I shoved her off. The tall man was gone. So was Maggie. The altar was empty. The air had gone still. I grabbed my rifle and limped outside. The sky had darkened even though it was only noon. The town was silent. No cars, no birds, nothing. I drove straight back to my cabin, every turn of the wheels feeling heavier, like the land itself wanted me to stop. When I got home, The population sign at the edge of town had changed again. It no longer read 11. It now read 10. I stumbled into the house, bleeding and half out of my mind. My vision swam. My shoulder throbbed where Eileen had torn into me. I went to the bathroom and peeled off my shirt, trying not to scream as I poured rubbing alcohol on the wound. That was when I saw the bite mark clearly for the first time. It wasn't just a bite. The edges of the wound were growing, opening. Little rows of teeth were budding from the skin, like pus-filled cysts with serrated edges. They pulsed, chewing silently, drinking in the blood. One of them blinked. It fucking blinked. There's something growing inside me. Something hungry. By the time night fell, I knew I wouldn't make it another day. The thing in my shoulder had started whispering. Not in words exactly. Not in a language I could identify. But in intentions. Pulses of thought. Needs. It wanted. It hungered. And I could feel it growing deeper into the muscle, into the tissue, lacing through my bloodstream like black mold through drywall. I saw things when I closed my eyes, gaping maws opening under cities, subways being swallowed whole, children being pulled screaming through kitchen tiles that rippled like water. The ground itself had become carnivorous in my dreams. Everything was teeth now. I was no longer sure if I'd been infected when Eileen bit me or when I stepped inside the church. Or maybe it was earlier. Maybe it was the moment I saw the Tor site. Maybe that was all it needed, a witness. I blacked out on the floor sometime around midnight and woke up in my truck, engine running. My boots were muddy, my hands covered in someone else's blood. In the passenger seat was the shotgun I kept under my bed. I didn't remember grabbing it. I didn't remember anything, but I knew where I was going. The old meat processing plant at the edge of town. It had been shut down for decades, but the rumors about what went on inside never stopped. Cult stuff, animal sacrifices, satanic orgies. I always thought it was just bored kids inventing stories, but the air felt different now. As I approached the building, I saw the flicker of fire through the shattered windows. Chanting rose in the wind, guttural and wrong, like someone trying to mimic human speech but failing horribly. It made my bones hurt. I stepped inside, shotgun raised, and nearly vomited. The walls were covered in flesh. Not meat, but flayed skin, nailed like parchment, stretched and inscribed with symbols I couldn't process. Some still twitched. A massive pit had been dug into the concrete floor, surrounded by burning oil drums. Inside the pit was movement, shapes writhing against each other, boneless and wet. It wasn't the pit from Siberia. This was its echo. A local node, a feeding hole, a placeholder for something worse. A row of figures stood around it, 11 of them. And between them, bound in barbed wire, bloodied and barely alive, was Eddie, the town mechanic, the guy who helped me tow my old Jeep just last winter. His face was a mess, eyes swollen shut, jaw hanging loose like it had been shattered and reset wrong. His legs were gone, not cut, torn off. Strings of meat dangled from the stumps. His femurs snapped like chicken bones. I couldn't even tell if he was conscious. A hooded figure stepped forward and pulled off their mask. Mayor Trill. "Derek," she said, like we were old friends. "You should have left when you had the chance." I raised the shotgun, but before I could fire, something hit me from behind. I dropped to my knees as a thick hand shoved my face to the concrete. I felt bones crack. Blood filled my mouth. The shotgun was kicked away and skittered across the floor. They dragged me to the pit. Mayor Trill crouched beside me, her face calm. Every town has a role to play. We're caretakers of balance. 12 per year, not a soul more. Not a soul less. 1 for each month. We each serve in time, but no one serves twice. You've seen the ledger. You know what happens if we miss the quota. She nodded to one of the cultists, who stepped forward and held up a heavy cleaver. My heart slammed against my ribs as I saw what they were preparing to do. They weren't just going to throw Eddie in. They were going to butcher him first, feed the pit slowly, piece by piece. Eddie groaned, his only sound, a soft, wet sob that seemed to reach into the core of me. No, I croaked, trying to move, but they held me tight. The cleaver came down and bit into Eddie's shoulder. A thick spray of blood fountained out, splashing across the floor. Eddie screamed, what was left of his jaw flapping uselessly, and the noise he made was inhuman. He thrashed as the second blow came, severing the arm completely. They tossed it into the pit, where the writhing meat surged forward and consumed it with a loud, slopping snap. No chewing. No resistance. Just a wet gulp. They moved to the next limb. Then his ribs. One by one, they carved him apart. The air thick with blood and burned hair. The smell was unbearable. His intestines were pulled out, like ropes of hot sausage, tossed to the pit in wriggling handfuls. I was sobbing, not just from grief, but from fear, from the pressure in my shoulder, where the teeth had now fully opened, little worms of tongue-like tissue wriggling outward. I was becoming it, and it didn't want Eddie. It wanted me. When they were done, there was almost nothing left, just a head and torso, barely breathing. Mayor Trill knelt beside what remained of Eddie and whispered something into his ear before slicing his throat with a clean silver blade. His blood was caught in a large clay bowl and poured slowly, reverently, into the pit. The chanting stopped. Silence. Then the pit screamed. Not aloud, not in sound, but in everything. The metal groaned. The floor cracked. The walls buckled. My eyes burned. My skin blistered. The very concept of up and down failed for a second, and then it was gone. The tension broke. They released me. Mayor Trill smiled again. Your next year. Sleep well, Derek. And just like that, they walked away, leaving me beside the blood pit, shivering and hollow. I crawled out of the plant and into the cold. When I reached the town sign again, it had changed. Population 12. This is the Curator. I hope you've enjoyed today's scary story. Until next time.